Friends, allies, and Americans, welcome to the Defense of Democracy podcast, where we tell the stories of folks who defend your children's rights by advocating for inclusive public school systems and who fight for diversity across our nation. I'm your host, Karen Swoboda. Let's get into it. Hi, and welcome to the Defense of Democracy podcast. My guests today are Matt Hawn, a former social studies teacher and baseball coach from Sullivan County, Tennessee, and Rebekah Modrak, who is a professor with the University of Michigan. Matt, Rebekah, welcome to the Defense of Democracy podcast. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for having us.
Good. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Well, I wanted to invite you on because, Matt, you've got a really important story to tell. I know Rebekah and her team over at the University of Michigan have been involved in amplifying these stories of what's been going on with teachers around the country. So I think, why don't I start with Rebekah? If you could talk a little bit about your project and let us know what Trouble in Censorville is all about.
Sure. So maybe about 2.5, 3 years ago now, maybe 3.5 even, we started listening to K through 12 teachers, so that classroom teachers and librarians from around the country, as we were starting to hear about problems in which they were being fired or harassed online, serious harassment for doing their jobs, for teaching about U.S. history and for making sure that they have books that represented all students in the library. And what we were hearing from the educators was that one of the most difficult things to go through this experience was that they couldn't tell the story in their own words. They weren't allowed to speak on social media. They weren't allowed to talk to the press. If the story was written about in the press, it was a little soundbite, or it was from the perspective of the reporter and not really, with the full context or the details that mattered to them, how it affected their students, how it affected their career, the impact to their health, what their mobilization efforts were, the relationship with parents and the community, all of these things. And so we started listening and recording the stories and working with educators to write the story in their own voice. And we published the collection, 14 stories by 14 educators from around the country, states like New Jersey, New Hampshire, Tennessee, Kentucky, Texas, Florida, but even places you wouldn't expect, like outside of Seattle. And they're all here in the book Trouble in Censorville.
So I had gone on, there's a website as well where you can, anybody who's listening, you can view all of these recordings, and I'll put a link to the website in the show notes for anybody who wants to check it out. But it's just, is it troubleincensorville.com?
No, so the website videos, some of them are long, lengthy videos, and those are the first stories from the interviews. And the difference between those and the stories in the book then went through many rounds of like further question asking and more detail. So the more detailed stories are in the book, but online you'll see the first version of the interviews, sometimes presented by the educator, like Matthew presents his story on camera, and sometimes presented by an actor, especially if they needed to be anonymous.
Right. And that's, and for those who are listening, that's kind of how we found Rebekah and the work that she's been doing, because Defense of Democracy has just recently launched our Educators Defending Democracy, which is going to be similar to this, and it's just very compelling to actually hear from these teachers, whether it's from their own mouths or through an actor who is reading their story, to hear what's been going on. So that being said, Matt, I'd like to turn it over to you, and you've been kind enough to join the show today to talk a little bit about your story specifically.
Yeah. It's doing things like this that while I'm out of the classroom, being around like-minded people and people who empathize with my situation, it's really good to do things like this just for my mental health. But no, Rebekah contacted me about 1.5 years ago And I went up and told my story. I was at least the first tenured teacher in Tennessee dismissed during this culture war, this
Wow.
critical race theory culture war. And I taught a class called Contemporary Issues. And it was a COVID year. It was 2020, 2021. And after the insurrection, I assigned an article by Ta-Nehisi Coates entitled "The First White President." In it, there are some language. There's some, foul language. And a parent complained, and I was given a reprimand. I
And
fought the
what year
reprimand.
do you teach? Like, are you middle
These were
school?
juniors and seniors. Yeah,
Okay, so you're talking
juniors and
high
seniors.
school age
Yes.
kids. Okay.
And
Yeah.
so,
And
Matthew, the language in the article also, didn't it come from like a political figure, not from?
yes.
Yeah.
So he was quoting
Right.
people in or surrounding, the former president, and so a parent complained, and then I was given a reprimand. I fought the reprimand. They voted to uphold it, and then during the Derek Chauvin trial, we
Mm-hmm.
were talking about, we were watching it in real time, and a student brought up white privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And so I immediately said, well, what is that?
Mm-hmm.
And so we began to discuss it. And I showed a poem by Kyla Janae Lacey entitled White Privilege. And it's been seen 60 or 70 million times on YouTube. Like,
Right.
she's a very popular artist. It's a very powerful piece of art, too. And I showed that. And there are some language issues in that. There are 6 curse words. Out of 770 words. So
Can I just, I want to interrupt you for 1 second, because as
sure,
a
yeah,
parent, I see you're doing something which it kind of breaks my heart, because I feel like you are explaining why you taught something. And to me, and
yeah,
this is our whole thing. If you're an educator, and you have a background, and you have, invested your own personal time and money, and, your livelihood, really, to becoming a teacher, so that you know what's appropriate to teach kids, and you basically, feel like you have to justify, like, I'm like, okay,
hmm,
I would have given you the benefit of the doubt, right? Like, there are bad words out there. I learned them when I was in school. This is
right,
so, I understand why you're doing it, especially since we might have an audience of people who don't quite get this. But I want to really drive home the point that our educators are the ones who should be making decisions on what to teach kids. And especially someone like you, who is a social studies teacher, and you're also teaching, up to the minute kind of contemporary issues. Like, there's a lot that goes along with that. You should be allowed to showcase and not have to defend yourself. So I
yeah.
just wanted to throw that in there.
No, thank you. I mean, and two, I know my students better than anybody.
Mhm.
I know the community where they're from. One of the charges that I was fired under was failure to give varying viewpoints. I denied students access to varying viewpoints.
Okay.
Well, Ta-Nehisi Coates and Kyla Janae Lacey in my region of Northeast Tennessee and in Appalachia, they are varying viewpoints.
Hmm.
And, I wasn't promoting them. I was just introducing my students to them, because it's not, those aren't voices that we hear every day in Northeast Tennessee. I mean, I grew up here. I grew up the same way these kids did. And so for 10 years in this contemporary issues class, that was, the purpose of my class was to introduce students to things that they don't hear in the community and hear outside. And so I thought, whenever I saw this poem and this article by Ta-Nehisi Coates and the poem by Kyla Janae Lacey, the first thing after I saw that poem was, God, I've got to show this to my kids. Like, I have to show it to my class. They'll love it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And,
And
you know,
to Karen, your
yeah,
point about, the importance of exposing kids to this material from a parent's perspective is really important, but also from the Supreme Court, which ruled on this question of language in 1969 And the court said, I think at the time the article that had been assigned had the word mother effer in it. And the court ruled, that if we have to shield high school juniors and seniors from the word mother effer, then we fear for their future. They're exposed to a lot more. They should be exposed to a lot more. And let's not pretend that this language doesn't have meaning to them.
Absolutely. I mean, I often say, you know what, and this is, and there are so many arguments against this kind of behavior and this kind of harassment of our teachers. But, any child who has a cell phone in their hand has access to everything. And even if you're one of those parents, which I kind of was, I mean, I held off as long as I could, who didn't give their child a cell phone, if their buddy sitting next to them has a cell phone, I mean, this is the reality that we live in. So anyway, Matt,
Mm-hmm.
continue. So yeah, so you go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, I showed the poem, and I even, because of the reprimand, which they brought up the inappropriate language in the reprimand, I
Mhm.
tried to mute Kyla's curse words. And I
Okay.
felt terrible about, because she's an artist. She has those in there for a reason.
Right.
And to hear her say it, like, why does she have to be nice about racism?
Right.
Right.
It's a great point. Yeah. And so I felt really bad for even trying to censor those or censor her. But, because I wanted to keep my job, because I respected, my administration and their wishes, I tried to abide by the
Be-
reprimand, but I missed it. Like, a few slipped in. So there were 6. I got 2, 4. I muted 2, 4 curse words. The students heard 4 curse words. And then on May the 5th, I was brought in to discuss it about a week later. And then on May the 5th, 2021, the same day the state of Tennessee passed its divisive concepts legislation, it
wow.
passed the General Assembly that morning. And then that afternoon, I was dismissed from a 16-year job. And I never had any disciplinary issues whatsoever when teaching or coaching.
There's so much. I know, and you were a baseball coach too. I mean, you were really invested in that school, and you're the kind of teachers who we want out there, who to support. Are you familiar with the term the chilling effect?
Yeah.
Okay, can
Yes.
you explain that for our listeners? Because you just gave an example of it, and I think
Mm-hmm.
it's a good time to talk about that.
Yeah, I think one of the themes in this book, Trouble in Centerville, and just with this whole culture is, they are going after teachers like me, like veteran teachers,
Mm-hmm.
and subjecting them to these disciplinary actions. Well, when other teachers see this happen to a Matt Hawn or to other teachers in the book, well, it makes them start to censor themselves in the classroom and chill their speech in the classroom,
Mm-hmm.
because they've seen what I've had to go through. They've seen what other teachers have had to go through. And so they don't, they just want to go on with their life and not lose their job. And
Right.
so it chills the speech of the teachers in the classroom. And because of legislation like this too, if a teacher, and what happened to me and what happened to other teachers, if they even suspect that a conversation or a subject could steer in a direction
Oh my God.
involving race, gender, any of the divisive concepts, they are going to avoid that altogether.
Yeah. And there's there's a timeline in the book because Matthew in his essay and so many of the other educators brought up different historical markers like Brown versus Board of Education, or different times in our history when censorship like this, or teachers have been fired before for reasons that were solely based on identity, rather than legitimate reasons. Well,
Mm-hmm.
in that timeline, the last entry, I think, is a study that Rand put out, where they showed that in states that did not have divisive concept laws or anti-CRT laws, so states where you think teachers can teach whatever they want, 55% of those teachers are still self-censoring in terms of any topics related to politics and
Yep.
social topics. Yeah.
I want to give a quick example of something. Now, I'm from New York, so you figure we're pretty progressive, right? But here is an example of something that happened to my child. I want to say it was a year and a half ago. It was a little while ago, but they came home from school and they were talking about a class that they were taking, and the topic was the Holocaust. It had something to do with the Holocaust. And one of the kids raised her hand and she said, "I don't believe in the Holocaust." Okay. And the teacher said, "I'm not going to discuss this right now." So that whole classroom of kids left with a question in their mind as to whether the Holocaust existed, because there are pressures from parents who just don't want things spoken about. And it's just easier for a teacher. I mean, I was very upset. I was very upset.
Yeah.
But you can see why a teacher would do that, because she has somebody saying the Holocaust doesn't exist. Now, I mean, like, what should she do? She should absolutely say, well, you can say whatever you want, but if you don't want to, if you take a test and you say that, you're going to fail. And I want to make it perfectly clear that this genocide absolutely happened and existed, and drive that home. But she was afraid to, so she allowed that. And that's probably like one of the more minor issues. The bigger ones are teachers who are just saying, "I'm not going to have these certain books in my classroom because it might get me in trouble."
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Or in
And
Florida.
And yeah. And, it's an ethical dilemma, moral dilemma for the teacher too. Do you allow a statement like that to exist in a classroom?
Right.
Or do you worry about your job?
Yes.
Like if I do say something about that, then, I may not be able to pay rent, to groceries, lose my health care, all these things. But then, knowing that your students, like you just said, are walking out of there not 100% certain, that the Holocaust did happen, that's a difficult position to be in for the teacher, just ethically.
Right. And I mean, at very least, maybe she would lose your job, but you could almost, and knowing the parents in my district, or a handful of them, you can almost guarantee that if she had answered that question appropriately, that she would have had, that there would have been a big fuss put up over something that should be an absolute non-issue ever. So she knew that to answer that, she would be inviting a fight, and that's got to be exhausting.
Right.
So we're about halfway through the podcast. So I always like to do, about midway through, a little shout out to one of my volunteers. And today, because we're talking about issues regarding teachers, I want to give a shout out to Jenny Bobo, who is the volunteer chair of Educators Defending Democracy. Jenny has taken this group, and from the ground up, it's sort of a combination of a support group. Matt, exactly what you said. There are teachers who don't know who to turn to. Sometimes you just need someone to support you, to be in a supportive environment. And so Educators Defending Democracy, they meet once a month. They're heavily vetted. So we actually have a personal interview with everybody who wants to join this, so that we're as protective as we possibly can be with everybody's identity. Some of them do share their stories publicly. Some of them share them privately. We're going to start doing a little bit of a video diary for them as well. So Jenny is one of these hardworking volunteers who has put together this amazing group. If anybody's interested in Educators Defending Democracy, just check out our website, defensivedemocracy.org. So thank you, Jenny. Now, Matt and Rebekah, back to you guys. What else do you want to share with our listeners today regarding your story and trouble in Censorville and what's happening?
Matthew, do you want to describe the impact of being told that you were being fired and the process you've gone through since then?
Yeah. I think that's one thing that tends to get lost, is the effect on the individual teacher. And so here we are, December 13th, 2024. Tomorrow will be 3 years since my second appeal, and I still haven't had a resolution to this. And so that's how long, I was fired on May the 5th, 2021, and I am still waiting to get a decision from the court. So in Tennessee, there's a 3-step appeals process. We're in the 3rd step, but that's how long this has taken. And, I think it's an issue for teachers during this process. Like, how are they going to pay their bills?
I was going to
Fortunately,
say, are you not getting? Yeah, go ahead. Tell me what you're.
yeah, my sister started a GoFundMe, 2.5 years that was supposed to last 2 years. But here we are in year three. Fortunately, I've had a job
Mm-hmm.
for the last year, but it's had to start in at ground zero. So I'm not a 16-year veteran. And just the
Oh my
mental
God.
issue of dealing with this every day
Mm-hmm.
and thinking about it. The world has moved on, and that's fine, and I understand that. But for us, it's still very, very real.
Right.
And I think a lot of these groups, they want to focus on one thing, or a lot of people in support of teachers, like the lawyers, want to focus on the case. The union, they want to focus on the case as well, and protecting the union. But it's a much bigger issue for the individual teacher.
Right.
Just how did they stay safe? Physically safe
Right.
too. There's a whole host of issues that need to be addressed with this
And
culture
there,
war. This, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, no, no. I mean, it really is heartbreaking to hear your story. And like you said, you're out of insurance. I mean, think what, and you were tenured,
Hmm.
that,
And I'm a
that,
type 1 diabetic too. So
oh
that,
my God.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really scary. I have a child who wants to become a teacher, and he happens to be a member of the LGBT community. I mean, it's really just an awful time.
Hmm.
Um,
One of the contributors, another contributor to the book, Willie Carver, who was the Kentucky Teacher of the Year and is a gay man, and led they couldn't call it a gay student alliance, so they had to call it like a, like life affirming club. I forget what the title was, but he sometimes says that when he's advising people who are, especially gay people who are thinking of going into education, to think of it as military service. Like it
hmm.
would be too hard to do it for more than a few years. So
Wow.
think of it in like a 4-year shift, something like that. And it is really like sad to think that that's how many pressures educators face, that they have to understand it under those terms.
And that,
Yeah.
and that's what kills me as a parent. Here's somebody who wants to be a teacher who hasn't graduated high school yet. This is all he's wanted to do.
Wow.
And he's really, really smart and really passionate, and studies, and he tutors kids, he tutors his peers because he really enjoys it. And what you're saying is, like, we have potentially in the queue right now awesome, excellent potential teachers who are being told, and it's probably good advice, to plan for it as though it was the military. And that really is, at the end of the day, it's our kids who attend the schools who will really suffer for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of my
Yeah. I
favorite
mean,
parts. Oh,
yeah, sorry,
Matthew, go
Rebecca.
ahead.
No, go ahead, Rebecca. No, you.
Well, one of my favorite parts in your story is when you describe the impact for you of your own education. When you went to college and people that you were exposed to there, and
Mm,
how it transformed your life. And I think somebody who has a really good education, it is transformative. I mean,
Mhm.
everything in your life can change because of it.
think
And,
about
and that's something we all want too, as parents, as community members, is we all want good teachers, and we are driving people from the profession.
mm,
Not potential teachers, future teachers, and even current teachers are leaving in droves.
absolutely. So, let's use the last 4 minutes or so of the podcast to talk about something. I always like to end on a positive note. It's really hard to do that sometimes, but we can think about, sometimes the positive note is what you can do. So what can we offer people who are listening to this as something other than, of course, I'm always going to say, join Defensive Democracy, stand up for your teachers. But if you're a teacher, what advice do you have to give them? Or if you're a parent, who do you want to, what advice do you want to give the parents who are, watching this car crash in slow motion?
It's very, like you said, it's very hard to be positive these days.
Right.
But if I'm a parent and I'm listening to this, I'm going to go to school board meetings and make sure that our teachers are protected.
Hmm.
But that still doesn't protect them from the law. And so in the state of Tennessee right now, the TEA is challenging the divisive concepts legislation. So keep an eye on that. They are challenging it under the vagueness clause. And
Hmm.
so it is in federal court. I'm not sure where it is in that process yet, um, but that's something to keep an eye on. And then hopefully that will be overturned and that will start a domino effect in these other places.
Yeah, I really hope for that as well. And what do you think? What's the timeline? So you've been doing this now since 2021. Is there a light at the end of the tunnel for you?
I hope to be back in the classroom. I mean, that's my ultimate goal, is to be back in the classroom in Sullivan County. And, the answer to that, Karen, is I don't know.
Wow.
Like the governor of Tennessee just sent out a tweet yesterday, or made a social media post about it's time to bring up his school choice bill got defeated in the last session, and now they're bringing it up again. And so they're going to keep coming after this, or they're going to keep doing it. And, we need people to contact their legislators and say, hey, look, we love our public schools. We love our teachers.
So, and let me, again, I'm going to throw in, so we say that a lot, like we contact our legislators. And I think that sometimes if you're listening to the podcast, it sounds great, but you don't quite know how to do that. So that's another benefit to joining Defense of Democracy, because one of the things we will do is we meet every Tuesday night and we go through all of these steps, how to write all these things that Matt is talking about, to show public support of your teachers, writing a letter to the editor, contact your legislature, show up at your school board meetings. Sorry, but this is the world that we live in now. And whether or not you have a kid in the school district, if you care about your community and democracy at large, these are the things that have to be part of your lifestyle, to actually taking it off of putting it into action, taking it off of social media, taking it off out of the conversations only, and putting it into practice. So thank you, Matt, for that. Rebekah, is there anything you'd like to share in closing?
I would say have a lot of conversations with educators and, express support directly to them, so that if they need help, then they can direct you. If they need you to talk to the administrator. I mean, it was astounding the number of stories we heard where it was the administrator who should have the teachers back and who should be, supporting their expertise and reminding parents in the community of their expertise, who instead was the one to undermine them in the classroom. And so talk with educators so that you understand the kind of supports they need and what they're going through.
Matt and Rebekah, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Again, if you're listening, I'm going to put in the show notes information to the stuff we referenced today. Many thanks. And it was great seeing you guys. And I look forward to hearing more. And hopefully, Matt, looking forward to a decent outcome for you at the end of all this.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Yeah.